Oh, my God.
You can't fight in here. This is the rage room.
This is the rage room.
From New York Times Opinion, I'm Carlos Lozada.
I'm Michelle Cottle.
I'm Ross Douthat.
And I'm Lydia Polgreen.
And this is Matter of Opinion, where thoughts are allowed. It's just what I do.
It's what you do.
It's just what I do. So, last week, as you may have heard, Republican Representative from New York, George Santos, was booted from Congress after weaving what our colleagues here at the New York Times called a tapestry of lies. And
more like a bunch of throw rugs sort of cast. I mean, let's not...
Beer cozies.
Tapestry implies that they all fit together. And anyway...
They're a thing of beauty. And more than the tapestry, really, the 23-count indictment charging him with conspiracy, wire fraud, identity theft, and various other misdeeds. His final words as he was walking down the House steps were, "To hell with this place," which is not how I feel about my workplace. Let me just make that clear. Now, this scandal was intriguing to me because I kind of feel like the bar for what counts as a true political scandal has been shifting in sort of interesting ways. So what I want to talk about with you all today is what even counts as a legit political scandal anymore. Has the Donald Trump era in American politics changed the way we assess scandal? And on top of that, how do we decide what the consequences of a scandal should be? So start us off. I know it's kind of weird to think of like a favorite political scandal. But I'm wondering, is there some episode in politics that for you feels like the quintessential political scandal? So tragic or bizarre or horrifying or just silly that it stays with you?
I'll go first. I wanted to start with something that was really meaningful, and I was like, well, but like, what about a great scandal like when Bill de Blasio, the former mayor of New York City, ate pizza with a knife and fork? Like that was a real New York scandal.
What about when he killed the groundhog?
Oh, that sealed his fate.
If you keep it to mayors, mayors of New York City are just a gift that keeps on giving. Don't even get me started on the current mayor.
Come down to Washington.
But
there's a history.
But my real answer is, and my real choice is the Clinton-Lewinsky affair. And, maybe it's a little overdetermined because, I'm the same age as Monica and I lived in D.C. in those years, and my entire kind of like political consciousness, indeed, my entire adult life has been lived, it's probably too dramatic to say in the shadow of, but, the politics that I have experienced have been shaped by that scandal. And it has a little bit of everything: sex, workplace misconduct, abuse of power, ushered in this kind of new era of impeachment, built the cult of the never-ending investigation and the crusading special prosecutor. There was some woman blaming in there, and so on. So for better or worse, I think that's the one that has loomed largest over my political life. But I'm curious, Ross, how about you?
So I'm going to pick the Richard Nixon checkers scandal.
Of course.
Which is a deep
that
cut.
Is a deep
when I was young, probably most Americans would have recognized.
Ross, were you ever young? I'm not sure.
I'm going to outlive you all. I'm going to bury you all.
It got dark.
I think it did get
Methuselah.
dark quick. Well, it's Nixonian, right?
Yes,
They're trying
it
to
is.
be Nixonian.
Yeah.
So for those who don't
Ross
know,
has an enemies list.
when Richard Nixon was on the vice presidential ticket with Dwight Eisenhower, he was accused of improper use of funds that had been raised by some of his donors to reimburse him for political expenses. And there was a chance that this was going to be a big enough deal that he would be kicked off the ticket. And so Nixon went on TV and gave an extremely detailed address defending himself. It's this sort of tangled, complex, on the one hand, on the other hand, here's what you should think about this, that culminates in Nixon detailing all of his personal finances, basically an anticipation of his entire career as a guy who felt like he was an outsider who never fit in with the swanky country club Washington elite. But just sort of listing all of these expenses, Pat sold her interest in her father's estate for $3,000. For 4 years, we lived in an apartment in Park Fairfax. the rent was $80 a month. Just sort of incredible.
What a bargain.
And then culminating, right, in this, sort of masterpiece where he says, actually, I thought maybe we could play a brief piece of it.
We did get something, a gift, after the election. You know what it was? It was a little Cocker Spaniel dog, black and white, spotted. And our little girl, Tricia, the 6-year-old, named it Checker.
Checkers.
And I just want to say this right now, that regardless of what they say about it, we're going to keep it.
It's not an incredible scandal. It's an incredibly boring scandal. It's an incredible reaction and an incredibly successful one because Nixon remained on the ticket and went on to become, one of America's greatest presidents, right? That's
how I remember
That's
it.
how you remember? That's what I thought.
I feel the need to veer in a different direction.
Go for it,
Thank
Michelle.
goodness.
I'm just going to go pure salaciousness, but I feel it is my job to look outside of Washington and remind everybody that New York can be very special too. So I am going with the Client 9 scandal. For those of you who have managed to repress this, it is Eliot Spitzer, the fallen New York governor, who got busted for spending big on high-end prostitutes. He wound up snared in an FBI wiretap investigation and wound up resigning as governor in March of 2008. So what I love about this is, one, I love the hypocrisy. Spitzer, as Attorney General of the state, had prosecuted several prostitution rings. And I also love that this was a good old-fashioned sex scandal that didn't threaten democracy or prompt a constitutional crisis. The guy was just a horn dog. Probably shouldn't have even been a scandal, except, prostitution is illegal. But it was just a kinder, gentler era of sex scandals, and I miss it.
One of my favorite details from that one was,
the socks?
Not safe for work. Exactly.
Don't mention the socks.
He liked to keep the socks on.
Don't do it.
Now, Michelle, you were saying that this is a scandal to get us out of Washington, but it's not. Because it was at the Mayflower
It was at-
Hotel
that's right.
I know.
in downtown Washington.
But
it is a perfect Washington scandal. I love
New
it.
York.
They reached
I love
all
it.
the way to Albany.
So, of course, Ross brings up Nixon, but doesn't bring up Watergate. Watergate's
the rule was these were supposed to be real scandals.
Watergate's
right?
exactly.
Not
Watergate's
just,
Watergate's not my
media.
pick, but
your
since
scandal?
Watergate is so obvious, I'm not going to do Watergate. And I will succumb to recency bias, and I will pick the scandal involving the former mayor of Baltimore, Catherine Pugh, who delicious
Yes.
scandal.
No, this was a good one.
Who wrote a series of children's books called Healthy Holly, and she sold them in bulk to various entities that just happened to have business before the city. In many cases, even failing to deliver
Purely
the
a
books
coincidence.
themselves. It was a pure transaction.
Pure coincidence. Yeah.
She eventually pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy charges, was sentenced to 3 years in prison. But the mechanism of sort of using this children's book in order to sort of facilitate this money flow into your pockets is just so, it's almost like sort of Eastern European dictator kind of thing, like you must buy my book.
But
the real scandal,
Yes.
the real scandal is that the books sucked.
Oh,
The books were bad.
that's so harsh.
I read Healthy Holly, and
it did not meet your standards?
and I reviewed it for the Washington Post, where I was working at the time, and it was not a good book. I even read it with my children to see if they liked it.
There's
They
real
did not.
pathos there, though, isn't there? I mean, I think I speak for all of us who have perhaps unpublished works of fiction out there.
Oh, I'm going to need that. I'm going to need that unpacked, Ross.
That the idea of someone. I mean, okay, maybe she was just using it to sluice money to her family. That's the most cynical perspective. But the other perspective is she thought she'd written something great that just hadn't been appreciated by an uncaring public.
Do you think that's what she thought? Do you think that's what she thought?
Harsh critics, and she saw an opportunity to get her little work of genius out into the world. And who among us has not had that sentiment? Like, if only I could wave a magic wand. It doesn't even have to be unpublished.
And sell hundreds of thousands of copies
of your beautiful, precious creation. I find that profoundly moving. I'm not going to lie.
Oh my. So let's see. What have we had? We've had sex, money, sex, money.
Literature.
That kind of
Literature.
captures
Come
that
on.
kind of captures the universe of political scandals. Now, to move us along here, what I'm wondering is, and maybe we don't have to use the 4 that we brought up, but we can. But are there any kind of elements, any characteristics that a scandal needs to really rise to the level of a political scandal? Are there certain hallmarks or even certain consequences to your mind that it has to have?
No, you don't have to have the certain consequences. I mean, you can have a variety of different hallmarks. It needs to be salacious or consequential. It kind of needs to be beyond the ordinary level of grift and graft that you see. But beyond that, legality or illegality isn't a necessary element, though it certainly helps. There's a wide range in which the politician can play and get himself busted.
I think it helps first if it's not just an extension of an ideological program, right? It's good if it seems to be driven by baser appetites, right? Like if the mayor of Baltimore had been, a intense woke ideologue and had wanted all the kids in Baltimore schools to read her take on anti-racism, it would have been, there would have been pathos there too, but it would have been less
humor.
Less humor, less interest. But with the wrinkle that it's good if there's hypocrisy, right?
Yeah.
Like the
Always.
Spitzer prosecuting Johns and Madams and then getting hoisted on his own socks. And Clinton and Lewinsky, right, had this was part of the swirl of the scandal. Clinton is the champion of liberal feminism. And then so the question becomes, what do you liberal feminists make of this guy, having his way with an intern?
And of course, he had been, accused of rape. And I think there's been a reconsideration of what actually happened with the Juanita Broaddrick case and lots of different airings of it. So,
and yet the one we remember is
the blue
Monica
dress.
Lewinsky.
Monica Lewinsky and the blue dress.
You see, the blue dress matters. Not just that it mattered in the moment as sort of, proof of concept.
DNA
but
proof.
Scandals, especially the ones we remember, tend to have something super weird and memorable that just sticks out, right? Like, would we remember William Jefferson's corruption scandal if he had not hidden the money in the freezer?
Yep.
Frozen food.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, would we remember that, Mark Sanford had a girlfriend. First politician to ever have a girlfriend, right? But no, he was hiking the Appalachian Trail.
Oh,
right?
Larry Wide Stance Craig. We cannot
Wide
forget
Stance. Wide
Larry
Stance.
Wide Stance.
Right?
Or,
Gary-
Risky Business. You guys remember?
Monkey
Donna
Business.
Hart.
Monkey Business. Monkey Business. Risky Business, underrated Tom Cruise movie.
Yeah, yeah.
Monkey Business.
Also featuring prostitution. Carlos is going to give us the facts here.
God, I feel so old because I remember this.
You
Gary
are
Hart,
old. All
Gary
of you
Hart
are old.
Easy.
was the
Junior.
Not you.
was the
Not you,
overwhelming front runner for the Democrats and probably for the presidency leading into 1988. And before Hart, I think really Gary Hart changed American political scandals forever because before Gary Hart, the kind of general press behavior is that, as a legacy of the Kennedy era, and more, is that, the personal life of politicians is their business, right?
Especially when they're Democrats.
Ben
Sorry.
Bradley, when he would reflect on this years later, Ben Bradley, the late former editor of the Washington Post, said that the old policy kind of was like, hey, if you're a senator and you're drunk at home, that's your business. If you're a senator and you're drunk on the floor of the Senate, that's my business, right? But Gary Hart really changed it all. And Gary Hart was having an affair with a woman named Donna Rice. And the Miami Herald basically did a stakeout and saw him hanging out at his place in Washington with Donna Rice. Monkey Business was the name of the yacht where he was photographed with Donna Rice on his lap. And suddenly journalism was covering the sort of private scandals, peccadillos, misdeeds, infidelities, fill in the blank, of politicians at the highest level. Now, historically, we've looked back at this quote he gave. I think he gave the Times Magazine, saying, my life is super boring. Like, go ahead and follow me. Like, essentially. And so the narrative of the Gary Hart saga is that Gary Hart dared the press to follow him. And guess what? The Herald took him up on it, and that's his own downfall. And I believe it's Matt Bai in a really good book, and I've covered this whole period.
Always with the books.
But my
print the legend.
My favorite thing about I think it's in the Matt Bai book as well, Ross. That one of my favorite is that when he asked Gary Hart if he had any regrets about this episode, Hart's regrets seem to be that like this kept the country from experiencing his presidency, right? And also like, look, if I'd been president, then George H.W. Bush wouldn't have been president. And if George H.W. Bush hadn't been president, then George W. wouldn't have been president. And then there wouldn't have been an Iraq war.
It's the
and
butterfly
all these people wouldn't have
effect.
died. And suddenly he was on this tirade about kind of like all the ways that having withheld his presidency from America was bad. Which is astonishing.
But which is also probably a key ingredient of a good scandal, right? Is that you want the central figure to be in some way entertaining. Well, either nakedly entertaining in the style of George Santos, or to some extent William Jefferson Clinton and Donald Trump, or someone like Spitzer, like Hart, who seems kind of like, an arrogant prig, if for one, right? Both of those work.
Yeah, taking someone down a peg is always satisfying, and we love to sort of exalt a leader and then bring them down. I mean, I do think that the sex and money is an essential ingredient in some way, although I'd expand it somewhat, and to paraphrase Sigmund Freud, love and work and love. That's all there is, right? So if we think of love and work as being, in crass political terms, sex and money, then it would make sense that those are the things that are kind of the key ingredients of scandal. And add a sort of mix of hubris in there, add some hypocrisy that always helps, some delicious details help too. I'm curious what you guys make of the kind of downward definition of scandal, though, right? Like, the sort of quintessential example of this is, of course, the time that Barack Obama wore a tan suit. And Lou Dobbs just went absolutely nuts over it. I think there was another scandal involving him eating a hamburger with mustard, which I didn't even know.
It's Dijon.
Oh, Dijon
Lydia.
mustard. That's right. And there was the arugula scandal.
The idea that any of these were a scandal is farce. And that's what happens when you have somebody who was not inherently troublesome or problematic or somebody who could keep his pants zipped. You have to go reaching for things.
But were these scandals? Does anybody here want to stand up? I'm looking at you, Ross. Stand up for the idea that any of these were actually scandalous.
No,
or a trivial scandal that's worth including.
I mean, I think there's cases, like there's a case from Times Lore where George H.W. Bush was famously reported as being baffled by a supermarket.
Yeah, scanner.
Checkout
Those
scanner.
scanners.
The
Right.
scanner, yes.
And the argument from defenders of George H.W. Bush, without getting too deep into Times lore, was that this was misreported and that George H.W. was actually asking a perfectly normal question about some genuinely novel piece of supermarket technology. But no, I don't. I think there's a pattern with Obama where, there was like a slow news week and there was a few days of silliness about the tan suit.
Was it
And
August?
then-
Was it
Right,
August?
and then
Yeah.
and then liberals like to look back and say, "Oh, Republicans wanted to impeach Obama over the tan suit," which, in fairness, might have been true of Lou Dobbs. Lou Dobbs would have impeached
Somebody
Obama
would
for
have.
anything, but I don't think. There's a form of sort of partisan back and forth where you're making fun of somebody. You're not literally saying they should be impeached.
You mentioned George H.W., and it's funny that you remember the scanner, right? But we were talking about Gary Hart, and of course, George H.W. Bush ended up winning that presidential election. He was a man who was caught up in a far more consequential scandal at the time compared to Gary Hart's infidelities, and that was Iran-Contra. But what's the problem with Iran-Contra?
Boring.
Too complicated.
Complicated.
It's too complicated. It's got a hyphen. Like, it's just, there's too much going on, multiple countries. And, there's great books, Ross, on unpacking Iran-Contra. Theodore Draper's book, excellent book on the scandal. But
But
that's
also-
the thing. The scandal was too complex. and too many players.
And also it falls into my category
There was an ideology.
There was an ideology. They had some, misguided but genuine foreign policy objectives. And the
Illegal,
scandal,
yeah.
No, the scandal lay in illegal means to ends that, a normal U.S. government might have pursued. And I think that, again, it doesn't make it good, but it changes the sort of fun of the scandal. It also creates more of a constituency for defending the, anyone who supported the Reagan administration's foreign policy had some incentive to downplay the scandal, which is, connects to the general force defining scandal or sort of changing scandal in our own time, which is just the incredibly strong incentives for defending your own team.
So, Ross, you prefer your scandals to be non-ideological? That makes them more appealing?
I think they're more interesting as, well, I don't know personally. I mean, I think
all your scandals are ideological.
I think scandals are more likely to capture the imagination in a particular scandalous way if they don't also involve a dispute about big policy differences.
I think the public actually does not take to policy-oriented or even ideology-oriented scandals.
It moves from scandal to debate then, and that's not as interesting.
And it's too complicated, and sometimes it's boring, and it's whatever. But I think, it's sex and money.
Or it's tremendously important, but it's not a scandal the way people understand the term, right? So, what did the Bush administration, exaggerated the case for the presence of WMD in Iraq, right? Is that a scandal in the sense, right?
No, but not classically.
You know what? You're right.
But it's not classically.
Scandalous.
Yeah,
it's scandalous,
that's different.
but is it a political scandal? Right.
Yeah, that's different.
Especially when they weren't alone.
I think it gets back to the sex and money thing. That's what everybody can get their mind around. And what you need is a scandal with mass appeal.
So, okay, the elements of a scandal, according to matter of opinion then. Sex and or money. It's great if they're both there. A touch of hypocrisy. Ross, that was a great contribution. A sort of memorable touchstone, right? Like some kind of weird element that just makes it impossible to forget. So we've defined what makes a good political scandal. When we come back, we're going to get into whether Donald Trump has changed the way we think about the American political scandal and its consequences, for good or for ill. We'll be right back. And we're back. So before we talk about what the consequences of scandals should or should not be, I'll ask the sort of obligatory elephant in the room kind of question, and that is, has the Trump era in American politics, an era I think we're still in, has it changed the way we think about political scandals?
Well, I think inevitably it has, because I think there is this kind of omnidirectional, constant, ongoing scandal just always happening that makes it hard to differentiate. I mean, it's almost this sort of like the chaos theory of scandal. Like, if everything seems like a scandal, then really nothing is a scandal. And to me, the Trump era has been defined by that oft-quoted, perhaps to the point of cliche, line from Game of Thrones, right? Chaos is a ladder. And in all of the chaos and scandal, it becomes very hard to determine what are the things that are truly and utterly and completely scandalous. I think some of them to me seem quite clear, like, January 6th and denying that you lost the election. Those seem like extremely scandalous things to be involved in. But I think just the sort of omnidirectional nature of scandal in the Trump era has made it, I think, very hard for us to define like what's okay and what's like truly beyond the pale.
See, even if you're just talking about what we were looking at as pure scandals involving sex and money, I think Trump has emboldened more people to try and brazen out what they've done by just claiming it's a partisan witch hunt. It doesn't work for everybody like it works for Trump, but I do think it has made more people willing to attempt to just brazen it out.
Yeah, I mean, Trump removes part of the fun of scandal, which we were saying is you're sort of seeing someone get their comeuppance seeing them feel ashamed, right? The idea that you have shamed a public figure. Trump, by being beyond shame, it removes some of that sort of frisson. And that's, again, sort of his shamelessness is obviously part of his power. But if you just sort of deny the significance of things that are reported about you or things that you or your family may have done that sort of skirt the bounds of legality, it turns out you can go a long way. Now, I will insist in my partisan way that this really begins with Bill Clinton, that Clinton is sort of the pioneer of this, and Trump realizes what Clinton demonstrated in a way that people in the first decade of the 21st century did not. Clinton, by polarizing the debate, by saying this is, I did some bad things, he said that, which Trump wouldn't say, right? But by saying, the Republicans are out to get me, you have to stand by me, he was able to sort of roll through even a credible allegation of sexual assault. And I think it was only with Trump that it became clear that you could take that lesson and apply it to a much wider array of accusations, allegations, scandals, quasi-scandals, and so on. But you have to have, to get away with things, you have to be able to present yourself as a kind of bulwark against the other side. That was what Clinton did with Kenneth Starr as his foil. That's what Trump, once he got the Republican nomination, has always been able to do. And the guys who haven't, or the women for that matter, who haven't had the same success have usually failed to make that sale. George Santos, didn't Santos say, they're coming after me because they want to come after you, right? And with Santos, it's just absurd. But somehow that line worked for Bill Clinton in effect, and it worked for Donald Trump, but not for Santos.
It worked for, if you'll recall, Jim Traficant back in the day. He was a congressman from Ohio who was just
truly great American.
He was truly a character. He was a Democrat from Youngstown area in Ohio, pitched himself as champion of the white working class, and all of these allegations. He had already been indicted for ostensibly taking bribes from the mob, and he convinced a jury that it was just a secretive sting operation he was running, and that's why they had him taking money. And then that celebrity buoyed him into Congress, where he soon, after a few terms, found himself in a similar situation, and he just blamed it all on the elites who were out to get him, and he would make these crazy floor speeches about the conspiracies.
Great floor speeches.
Okay,
truly
great,
glorious.
Yet completely unhinged floor speeches. And he wound up being, he is the last person before Santos, who the House just had enough of, and he was convicted on all these counts, and they were just like, you gotta go, buddy. And then he ran for re-election from prison. So I do think that a certain degree of shame, and he got 15% of the vote.
I think that shamelessness, but there's also something I think in this populist moment, right? I think about political machines like Tammany Hall in New York and elsewhere, where their role was to, kind of carve up the spoils of government patronage and make sure that they got to the right people, and the right people were the people that voted for you, so certain ethnic groups were given, preference in jobs and things like that. And so, I do think that scandal, that corruption and the scandal that it attracts is in some ways something that a political system can digest and even perhaps thrive on. I've seen this in many countries that I've covered, where corruption, in fact, is an important ingredient to the go along, get along.
This gets to the heart of one of the things I've always sort of wondered about the Trump presidency is did Trump change the country or did he reveal the country? And I think that when it comes to scandal, it's and the shifting tolerance for scandal, it's far more the latter, that he revealed it. Politics have become so polarized that you just don't mind if your guy is corrupt or philandering or a liar or disgusting, as long as he's your guy and he's going to beat the other guy. And again, it's not new. This is not new. You've mentioned, Ross, the way, Bill Clinton was treated with kid gloves despite his own treatment of Monica Lewinsky. One thing where I think Trump is different from all the other sort of scandalous president is in his relationship to the truth. I don't mean that he's the first one to lie. Definitely not. But in Watergate, in Iran-Contra, in the Clinton impeachment trial, revelations of a president's dishonesty were consequential. Like, that really mattered. In the Final Days, which, Ross, is the second book about Nixon by Woodward and Bernstein.
I've heard of it.
After All the President's Men, there's a moment where Pat Buchanan, right, who was a Nixon speechwriter, and among the most devoted of the president's men, is explaining to some of Nixon's family members why there was one really damning Oval Office recording that meant he was going to have to resign. And it wasn't about law breaking or anything. It was about dishonesty. And he said, look, the problem isn't Watergate. It's not the cover-up. Is that he hasn't been telling the truth to the American people. A president can't lead a country he has deliberately misled.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
Now, in the Clinton impeachment, the fact that he hadn't told the truth, did he tell other people to lie? Did he not? Like, that was a huge part of the debate, especially like the on-the-fence senators who may or may not, vote to acquit or to convict. And in Iran-Contra, a similar thing. Reagan's worst moments in Iran-Contra are when it became clear that he hadn't been telling the truth. There's that famous March 1987 Oval Office speech where he says, a few months ago, I told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages. My heart and my best intentions still tell me that's true, but the facts and the evidence tell me it's not, right? Lying mattered, right? And if you were discovered to have lied to the public, it mattered. Trump has no presumption of honesty left to squander. So he doesn't even attempt to save face on the lies. And that is one thing that I think is a real difference, not just in degree, but in kind.
The thing that I always sort of have to force myself to remember about Trump is that his primary qualification for the presidency was that he was a reality television star. I know he'll say he was a successful businessman, blah, 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 all these other things. But like, no Apprentice, no Donald Trump presidency. That I very deeply, deeply believe, right? And reality television is part of a long chain of essentially the kind of like infotainment, news as entertainment, factual things being sort of massaged and told to us as like, this is a real thing that happened, but in fact, it's all being sort of produced and managed. And I think all of that has led to this kind of blurring of what is real and what is not, what is true and what is not. And I think that that's like part of the secret of Trump. And I think it began long before Trump. I mean, the era of cable TV news that is essentially just, people yakking at each other and vamping and filling time and, making the most of whatever the kind of like, a hot scandal of the moment is. That's been going on for a while, but it sort of, I think, reached a kind of apotheosis with Trump. And it's deeply, deeply linked to his, mastery of the medium and his ability to kind of like, to create this persona where, like, it doesn't really matter if you're telling the truth and we're all kind of maybe in on the joke until, our democracy's gone. But
also a feature of being a real estate developer.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
These condos are going to, they're going to be
fly.
right. But also Trump, unlike Reagan in that speech, unlike Clinton biting his lip before the camera, Trump doesn't acknowledge that he lies, right? I think Trump has drawn a bunch of power from the idea that the people who are supposed to be arbiters of truth, people in our profession, the media, that we lie or we shade the truth or we are dishonest. And so he's fighting with the media and doesn't give an inch, unlike those wimpy politicians who buckle. He sort of, lies all the time. It's that he never breaks character, right? He never sort of concedes that he might be lying when he's lying. And there's this constant question with Trump of, is he lying? Is he lying to himself? Like, what does he actually believe when he tells his lie?
I do think the bigger issue is just that for him, there is no such thing as actual truth. Truth is all relative. It all depends on what he wants it to be.
Postmodern president.
He's a postmodern president, but also he's a reality TV star, right? And so it's the quote unquote reality is the thing that you present. I mean, like, nothing could be more perfect than the thing that I read in Semaphore this morning about how, George Santos has become like just the absolute breakout star of Cameo. This, I don't know if you guys guys have ever used Cameo.
Oh, yes.
It's a wonderful app where you can get a celebrity to record a little video of message to somebody, and you pay.
I charge $500 an appearance.
Oh, $500.
on
Well, that's
Cameo.
pretty good.
Yeah. It's how do you
How's that going for you,
putting the
Ross?
kids through college?
There you go.
But the amazing things in the Semaphore report is that in the past couple of days on Cameo, George Santos is on track to make more money than he did in his entire time as a congressman. And, they're not so badly paid. So he's cleaning up.
So when Donald Trump said, I can stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, was that his declaration of sort of being completely scandal resistant forever? Is that the ultimate? Was he proven correct?
Yeah, I think he's correct.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that if Donald Trump shot somebody on Fifth Avenue in broad daylight, he would not win the Republican primary.
It depends on who he shot, Ross.
And I also think, he would, of course, be arrested and charged with a crime, and he could run for the presidency from his prison cell.
Think of the merch.
All right. On that note, where we can run from jail and perhaps win from jail, let's leave it there. That's plenty of scandal for 1 week. When we come back, one of us will get hot or cold. It's time for a hot cold. Who's hot or chilly today?
Okay, me. I am hot this holiday season on rage rooms. Places where you can go and pay money to destroy things and let off some steam. And I think that in post-pandemic America, there is almost no better gift for family and friends this holiday season. Everybody I know is getting certificates to rage rooms. They have been around.
God, who do you know?
Wow. I am serious.
I had not heard of rage rooms.
I just Googled rage
How
rooms.
can you
to
not have
begin
heard?
with.
Ross, I'm looking at you, and you need a rage room.
I am a Zen monk.
Wow.
Moving right
Serenity
along,
now.
you go and you pay your money, and you can buy a package of things to destroy.
Okay.
And these can range from these simple, like dishes or wine bottles, to like big honking televisions, and you just go at it. There's
Are they
almost
next door to the escape rooms?
Sometimes they're the same place. You can do this. No, it's
Probably
not
the
an
same
escape
people.
room.
Wow.
I'm just
I've done
saying,
escape
look,
rooms.
Can't
Against
stand
my
escape
will,
rooms.
but I've done them.
Can't stand it.
Escape rooms are awesome.
Are these in the where?
Yeah, they're in Washington area. They're in New York and Houston and all kinds of places. I think they started in Japan.
Well, that
Back
okay.
around.
Okay.
All right, that explains
I'm
a
buying-
lot.
I'm
That
buying it
explains
now.
a lot.
Have you
Yeah.
done this?
No, but I've got. I have been researching these extensively. I've got certificates for everybody. So
This is your Christmas shopping.
last year, everybody got axe throwing.
There you go.
This feels like an escalation, right?
I-
From escape room to axe
I'm
throwing.
concerned about American democracy in a way that I'm not usually on this podcast.
I'm just saying, in post-pandemic America, there are a lot of people out there walking around with a lot of rage. Instead of smacking a flight attendant or running somebody over with your car, maybe you should go to a rage room.
All right. Well, on that scandalous note,
Yes.
it is time for us to say goodbye, and we will see you next week.
Bye,
See you in the
guys.
rage room.
Thanks for joining our conversation. If you liked it, and I know you did, give Matter of Opinion a follow on your favorite podcast app, and leave us a nice review while you're there. Matter of Opinion is produced by Phoebe Lett, Sophia Alvarez-Boyd, and Derek Arthur. It's edited by Allison Bruzek. Our fact-check team is Kate Sinclair, Mary Marge Locker, and Michelle Harris. Original music by Isaac Jones, Efim Shapiro, Carol Saburo, Sonia Herrero, and Pat McCusker. Mixing by Carol Saburo. Audience strategy by Shannon Busta and Christina Samuelewski. Our executive producer and fearless leader is Annie Rose Stresser.